Yeah, welcome everyone. My name is Dan Sullivan. I am one of the programmers at Filament Lincoln Center. Just want to welcome you all to this free talk sponsored by HBO, which is a part of our a retrospective that we're presenting in our virtual cinema, which kicked off yesterday, telling pictures, the documentaries of Rob Epstein and Jeffrey Friedman. It's a 6-film survey of some of their nonfiction work, and it's going to be in our virtual cinema through November 5th. So yeah, we hope you'll take the opportunity to go back and acquaint or reacquaint yourself with these incredibly important films. I want to thank the distributor of 4 of the films, Milestone Films, without whose invaluable advocacy and work and support and so on. This retrospective certainly wouldn't have been possible, connecting us with Rob and Jeffrey and so on. Yeah, big shout out to Amy and Dennis. And yeah. And I think that about accounts for all of the housekeeping. Oh, I did want to mention that we also have a special bundle, a 4-film bundle, so you can get a small discount to see 4 of the films. So do check that out; it's great value. We're showing 2 films in this series, which actually precede your partnership with Jeffrey, those being the Times of Harvey Milk and the AIDS Show. I thought maybe it made sense to just kind of begin by talking about the early part of your career, just kind of what brought you, I think, to filmmaking, but more specifically documentary. And I guess like Word Is Out, it seems like an especially important early work. So yeah, how did you kind of come to documentary?
Yeah, I came to documentary by answering a classified ad back in the days when there was such a thing as classified ads in the back of a magazine. This was in San Francisco in 1976. I had just landed in San Francisco from the East Coast and was looking to do something in the arts. I mean, when I was a kid, I painted, and then I stopped doing art when I reached puberty, and then I decided I wanted to find my way back to it somehow, and started taking some photography classes, and came upon this ad, which said they were looking for a production assistant to work on a film about gay lifestyles. And I answered the ad and was invited to join the early days of the project, which then ultimately became the film Word Is Out. So Peter Adair was the mastermind behind that project, and ultimately there were 6 of us that collectively worked on it for several years. Veronica Silver, Lucy Massey Phoenix, Andrew Brown, Nancy Adair, and Peter Adair. And that was my film school. That was really Veronica and Peter and Lucy were my early teachers. And on that film, I got to do everything. So it was a fully immersive filmmaking experience. And Peter became my mentor and close friend. And then eventually we went on to do another film together, The AIDS Show, which is part of this retrospective.
Yeah. I mean, this is all sort of falling at like a really kind of, I guess like kind of iconic, vibrant period in like American independent cinema, but specifically like, documentary. And I'm sort of I was curious, like at the time, what sorts of nonfiction films, I think, were you looking at like in these early days, and what kind of left an impression on you?
I had a high school teacher in Millburn, New Jersey, in AP European history, and he took us. His name was Dana Stivers, and he took us into New York to see The Sorrow and the Pity. And that film was a real inspiration for Peter in making Word Is Out, and one of the films that we all looked at together and studied as we were formulating that project, as well as Shirley Clarke's Portrait of Jason, another important film, and a milestone, a film that Dennis and Amy reissued, Shirley Clarke's masterpiece, Portrait of Jason. So those were two important films in the making of Word Is Out. For me, in the making of the Times of Harvey Milk, while we were making Word Is Out, I saw Barbara Koppel's film Harlan County at the Castro Theater, and that film just opened my eyes into the possibilities of what a documentary could do, because it reached me so viscerally. Here I was, this young gay kid, watching a film about Appalachian coal miners in the Castro Theater in San Francisco, and having my whole worldview expanded. And that Barbara's film really was an inspiration for me in thinking about how the Harvey Milk story could reach an audience that might not otherwise be seeking it out.
Let's bring Jeffrey into the discussion, both literally and as a subject. So maybe could we go back to the sort of, I guess, like the birth of your creative partnership? I mean, how did you two meet, and kind of what do you think compelled you to start making films together?
I was working in New York as an assistant film editor on features and documentaries, and the film industry at that time was very straight, pretty homophobic, and the films that I worked on, by and large, felt disconnected from my experience. I love the movies. I just wasn't feeling connected to the content of the films. And a friend of mine dragged me to a theater on the east side of Manhattan to see a documentary he said was really important. I had to see it. This was 77, I guess, 76 maybe. And that film was Word Is Out.
77 it came out.
Yeah, so it was 77. And that was Word Is Out, and I was blown away. It was a really, really well-made film, and it was the first film we'd ever seen that was made by queer people about queer people, and it spoke to me. And I said, I want to work with those people. I knew they were in California, and I was planning to move to San Francisco or Northern California within a year or two. So I asked around, and I got the name of one of the filmmakers, Veronica Selver. And when I got to San Francisco, I called her up and we had a drink. And she said, you should come to a party I'm throwing for one of the other filmmakers this weekend. And that was Rob. And that was where we met. And we became friends first. Rob was working on the Times of Harvey Milk then, and I was working as assistant editor on a feature, Never Cry Wolf, Carol Ballard feature, and I offered my services. I helped design the photo animation and consulted on the editing. But I was kind of a volunteer consultant. And then we worked together on a film that Rob was producing, a TV documentary that I came on and edited. And we clicked and decided I think Rob proposed that we make a film together.
And Rob, when you began working with Jeffrey, I'm curious, since you'd already, you'd already made some work up to that point. I'm wondering how introducing Jeffrey and his editing and so on, like what kind of transformation you thought that made for your own kind of way of working.
Well, Jeffrey, I think the first real kind of hands-on rolling up our sleeves working together, aside from the animation work he was doing on the Times of Harvey Milk, and then we're working with photo animation stands, so it was a very different process from what it is now, much more laborious. But there was we were having trouble making a sequence work. It was the Harvey Milk's victory at the end of Act 1 in the Times of Harvey Milk. And Debbie and I, we were each working on different reels, and I think I was working on that section. I'm not sure, but anyway, we were having trouble. We had so little material to work with of actual archival elements that would really bring to life that moment of victory when Harvey is finally elected for the first time for the Board of Supervisors after multiple attempts. And it was an important dramatic moment, but we didn't really have the footage. We had scraps and it wasn't working, but somehow Jeffrey was able to help us shape that particular moment so it played like a moment. So I think that was the first time that I remember where we were kind of creatively really hashing something out and ended up somewhere new that we were both really excited about. And then the same thing happened when we worked together on this series, We the People. My episode, I was really struggling with getting the story structure working, and Jeffrey and working together, we again arrived at something that we were both excited about and excited about the process. So that kind of set the template.
Yeah. I want to turn to common threads in just a second, but I also want to mention to everyone who's watching, if you have any questions for Rob and Jeffrey, you can input them at the bottom of the Zoom interface in the Q&A field, and we will answer as many questions as we can before this session is through. So yeah. Anyway, now I want to look ahead to common threads, stories from the quilt, and I guess I guess like from a sort of like historical perspective, I think we know how the film kind of like how it came about, but I'm wondering sort of, I don't know, for you two, just kind of, what inspired you to make a film about the project. And I guess I'm especially interested in kind of, the experience of spending time with all the subjects, the interviewees, and so on. It was a long time ago, but I'm wondering sort of how those memories kind of sit with you now.
Well, I was just going to say something about the AIDS show, since that's part of your retrospective, which was before Common Threads, to kind of help set the scene for what was going on, what was going on with the epidemic and where we were with the epidemic at that point, and then subsequently where we were at with Common Threads. So the AIDS show Peter and I did in '86, and that was very early in the epidemic. We were at the tip of the iceberg, but we had no idea where we were in relationship to the totality of what the full-blown AIDS crisis would eventually become. But we did know that friends and loved ones were getting sick and dying quickly and dying horrible deaths. And that was something that we in San Francisco among our friends were experiencing and know was happening elsewhere. But, it wasn't really known experientially what we were going through. And Peter and I saw this play and felt that was an attempt to do a kind of cultural representation of the moment. And that's what the AIDS Show project was about. But the AIDS Show was really specific to San Francisco. It was very kind of specific to a moment. It had a very kind of immediacy to it. Common Threads was a very different kind of project when we saw the quilt and saw, just witnessed what the metaphoric power of the quilt, that opened up a whole other possible way in which we might take on the subject.
Yeah.
I'll let you take it from there. I just wanted to kind of.
Yeah, actually, if you don't mind, I just wanted to ask one
back
quick
and set up
follow-up.
the AIDS Show. Yeah.
I wanted to ask one quick follow-up thing about the AIDS Show, which is just that, at the time, perhaps even before you and Peter decided to make the film, did you see the theater rhinoceros performances in some way kind of like analogous to some of the things that you wanted to do like in cinema, like the kind of like intervention or like confrontation with reality that's like bound up in that performance?
Well, the show itself it's a series of vignettes, and each of the vignettes represent a story and a point of view of a mother, a point of view of a nurse, point of view of a hospice worker, point of view of a group of friends. So, I guess in that sense, that's what we tried to do in our documentary casting. They were doing in these theatrical vignettes. But I think the power of what we're trying to capture in the kind of representation of the AIDS Show was the role of community in this crisis. That we were depending on our own emotional, psychological resources to take care of take care of one another and take care of our community, and that felt like it was encapsulated in the theater experience. The kind of cathartic experience of going to see this show, and what the makers of the theater experience were doing and conveying in their own messaging.
I think for me, the power of that show was just that it was expressing things that we were feeling, but we were so terrified. It's really hard to describe what a scary time it was, because we had no idea what the disease was. We didn't know who had it. We didn't know, when it was going to come for us. There are feelings that are coming up around COVID that resonate very much with those feelings. And we were almost afraid. We didn't know how to talk about it. So I think the theater production of the AIDS Show was one of the first attempts to articulate something that the community was feeling. I think when we made Common Threads, it was also very early in the epidemic, but we felt we weren't just speaking to the community. We felt it was important to speak to people who were not affected by AIDS. And I think that's really, I think the film might have worked for people who were affected, but I think really our focus at the time was letting people know what this experience was that, some of us in various communities were going through. So when we were developing Common Threads, we started at the Names Project, the organization that invented, imagined, manifested the quilt. And we went through all the letters that they had. Letters had been sent in with quilt panels. And at that time, there were about 2,000 panels in the quilt. And we read through all those letters with Cindy Ruskin, our writer we were working with, who had written a coffee table book about the quilt. And of those 2,000 letters, we culled about 200 that we thought were, I don't know, somehow grabbed our imagination. And then we just kept whittling it down. We were looking to be representative of the epidemic. So we wanted to find representatives of the various communities that were being affected without it feeling too schematic and obvious. But we eventually narrowed it down to about 60 stories that we then we videotaped.
Well, I think we did a round of phone interviews.
With about 200 of them. And then of those 200, we videotaped 60. This would have been so much easier to do in the internet age, but we actually had to go visit people with video cameras and videotape them. And then we, from those characters, we whittled it down to the 5 that we finally followed in the film.
The videotape process, it's a pre-interview process. It's not, it's not a final production. It's really just a research process. And that goes back to Word Is Out and the process we did with that project.
And
also with Common Threads. Sorry.
Harvey Milk too.
Harvey Milk.
Right?
Yeah. Also with Common Threads, we knew at a certain point, HBO was behind the project. So we knew that it was going to be reaching a whole other level of audience that we didn't anticipate. And now we had the opportunity to really make a statement around AIDS at a time where, I don't know if there was another documentary yet about AIDS that had gotten that kind of mainstream broadcast, mainstream audience. So that was really important.
Well, there are, I think there are. We could probably spend like an hour talking about most films or probably each of the films in the series. But I guess with regrets, I want to move on to Where Are We, so we can get to the audience questions and so on. I mean, it's a very, I think Where Are We, Our Trip Through America marks kind of a striking turn for you guys following Common Threads. It's kind of it's maybe more diaristic, something of like a road movie. There's kind of an Americana element. But I'm also, in revisiting it a couple times for work on the series, I was struck by the sort of the role of the Gulf War, like the sort of specter, the way that it kind of informs so much what seems to be going on culturally, socially, maybe. And I think after, especially after like the Iraq, the like wars of conquest in the Middle East and so on, people kind of have like a different sense of like the significance of the Gulf War now. So I was just thinking did you guys always, how important was that? How important was kind of the political climate at the time in sort of your thinking through of the way that you wanted to approach this very kind of like personal, exploratory kind of documentary?
Well, we knew we were going from our blue bubble. It wasn't called that at the time.
Yeah.
But we knew we were going out into the red heartland, as they call it. So we knew that would be part of the dynamic, and it was certainly part of what we were interested in exploring. What we could I think we were looking for points of commonality with people who had very different backgrounds and very different belief systems than we did.
I think the Gulf War was something that we discovered while we were underway, and certainly in the material when we were editing. It wasn't anything. It wasn't part of the concept when we set out. But when we saw what we had, we realized that it was kind of a tonality to the piece. But we had two pretty simple conceptual underpinnings. One was going into an unfamiliar part of the country to us, and confronting our own preconceptions that we might have, and preconceptions that people might have about us. As that one guy says in the diner, he enjoys people talking to people from other countries when we identify ourselves as being from California.
Yeah. That's completely amazing.
and that's what it felt like for them and for us. And the other is, how do you make a connection with, how do you make any kind of momentary connection with a stranger in a passing interaction? And I think that's what we looked for in each encounter, with the nature of our questions, which we had some set piece questions, and then it was also, just going with intuition of the moment. I think that was the basic concept to it. The rest was serendipity and surprise.
It was also very freeing. It was a very, Common Threads was a very kind of structured film. I mean, we really we planned it out, and sort of everything fits in its place. And we wanted to do something looser and more improvisatory. So
no agenda.
Just finding things that, no agenda, and letting things happen.
And Rob, it's funny, Rob, but something you were saying about kind of about finding this the thread of the Gulf War sort of in the cutting room, I guess, or just after the fact, and it almost in a way that that almost seems related to something that comes up in the voiceover towards the end of the film. This kind of you guys are speculating or sort of worrying that perhaps on this trip you've only seen what you wanted to see, and in a weird way, finding something after the fact is almost disproves that, because you did see something that no one wants to see, like war, right? So I don't know. I was just wondering, was that that came up late in the film, presumably because it was something on your mind during the making of the film, probably projection or something along those lines?
So the voiceover element was something that we added late in the structuring of the film, in the edit of the film. And we felt like we needed to find a way to include ourselves, to both give more sense of the point of view of the filmmakers, literally, and to just have us find a way to have us be more part of the fabric of the film. It's also, I have to say, was the element that I always felt most self-conscious about, because it's not something we intended to do, not something we wanted to do, but we felt that the film compelled us to do that. And for years, I couldn't watch the film without cringing because of that. It was really interesting watching it again for this. And I had just a very different experience with it now. And, right now it's feeling like my most favorite project of ours, because I just saw a whole other kind of resonance in it. And so for so many different reasons, but mostly for the people that we met and encountered, and the issues that just come up from their own experience, from drug abuse and addiction and the nature of love, and just these really deep human subjects that just bubble right to the surface in these very quick and fleeting encounters. So I don't know, I was able to appreciate it in a whole new way and not be taken aback by my own self-consciousness.
Why don't we, I guess we'll, just being conscious of time, I'll steer us towards the Celluloid Closet. I guess just, I'd be curious, it was, before it was a film, of course, it was Vito Russo's book and lectures, clip shows, this sort of thing. So could you just talk, could you guys talk a bit about how the film kind of grew out of those sort of original texts or sources? And I guess it also stands out for the heavy use of archival material, and which so I was wondering sort of what the experience of working with all these clips, trying to put them together and create something new, how that kind of struck you.
Yeah, that film challenged us for a long time when we were developing it. It really took us a long time to figure out what the form should be. We started with Vito's book and with Vito.
Well, can I just quick interjection? I mean, originally we were just going to help Vito document his lecture show. We were really just going to essentially tape Vito doing his live performance.
Right.
Yeah.
Vito wanted it to be a TV series. He thought it would be a PBS series. So we started by helping him develop that idea. And then at some point, he just made it clear that we were going to make the movie. He was already sick at that point, and I think knew that he might not see it finished. But he wanted us to make it, and he wanted it to get made. And he wanted us to figure out a way to make it without him, because he was such a charismatic presenter of the information when he did his lecture clip show presentations. It was really the Vito show with clips, and it was very much a community event. I remember going to the Castro Theater, sitting with 1,500 people, and everybody just being gripped by Vito's passion. So we had to find a way to somehow translate that, and we went through a bunch of different iterations. We started editing with just the clips. So we collected them from VHS tapes and laser discs at the time, because there was no internet. We taped things off television, and we edited a 4-hour assembly of clips from 1895 to 1995 or 93, whenever it was. And then we couldn't figure out, how to shape that into a narrative. So we struggled with different strategies. We tried organizing it by stereotypes, because Vito had identified these different ways that queer people were represented in the movies: the sissy, the bull dyke, the psycho killer, the sad queen. And that was kind of interesting, but we couldn't figure out how to make a narrative out of that. We tried doing it chronologically, and that just had a kind of, this happened and this happened and this happened, and there was really no way to develop any kind of theoretical thread through that. So finally, with our colleague Sharon Wood, who we've worked with on several films, we came up with a structure that sort of married those two ideas. We figured out a way to tell the story chronologically, but using each era to talk about the stereotype that was predominant in that era. So once we had gotten that figured out, then we realized we needed to start talking to people to give context and meaning to the clips. So that's when we started trying to get people to sit down and be interviewed.
And Michael Lumpkin, who was one of the creators of the Frameline, the LGBTQ festival in San Francisco, left his position to come work with us and produce the film and help to make all that happen.
Yeah. And how did Lily Tomlin come to be involved?
Lily and Vito were good friends, and Vito was also a good friend of ours, and wrote, a lot of the book at my apartment in San Francisco. So always heard about Lily through Vito. He always had Lily stories, and Vito is one of these people that always would find ways to connect the disparate people in his life. So at one point we just reached out to Lily. We were having trouble raising money. So we approached Lily, and we went down and met with her at her house, and she said, let's go to HBO. Let's take it to HBO. And she was able to get the head of HBO on the phone, and we all flew in for a meeting, and HBO came on board. Yeah. And so Lily was instrumental to the project all along the way. And when it came time for us to decide on a narrator, she seemed like the obvious choice to us.
I should note it's an actual coincidence that HBO is a sponsor of this this talk. I guess before we open it up to the audience questions, I want to talk about paragraph 175. Another kind of shift for you guys, I think, and this time it's sort of a shift. You're sort of like looking away from the United States, but you're and also looking at kind of a different period. So I'm curious how the film kind of how it came about, but I think I'm especially curious about sort of developing these relationships with the subjects, considering I think there are a couple moments where it's like it seems like the people can't bear sort of revisiting some memories they have and so on, just sort of like what the whole experience of sort of living these relationships while making a film, what that's like.
So Jeffrey, you start and then I'll jump in.
Yeah. So that was a big shift for us. We were making a film about another culture, not only a different period in history, but it was in another language that we didn't understand, and for a long time, throughout the making of the film, in fact, we were always asking ourselves if we were really the right filmmakers to be making this film, because it wasn't our culture, it wasn't our story. The people we were interviewing were by and large non-Jewish Germans who had lived through the Nazi era, and they'd experienced some kind of persecution for being queer, but they were Germans and we were Jewish, and is this really, should we be doing this? And it was something that was, I think, constantly worrying us. Our producer, Michael Ahrensweig, who grew up in Austria and was our guide through the German part of the film, kept trying to convince us that we were the right people, that as outsiders, we would have a perspective that German filmmakers wouldn't have had. And I think we ultimately comforted ourselves that that was true. And with the ambiguity of dealing with these Germans who had lived through the war, we just decided to try to address that as in as direct a way as we could, and to include some of that nuance in the film. So there's a great moment where one of the men who's been imprisoned for being gay gets released from prison and goes and joins the army, and you can hear Rob sort of stuttering, going, "What? Huh? What?" So, you know, in little ways like that, we tried to acknowledge our ambivalence.
The project came to us through Klaus Mueller, the historian in the film, who Jeffrey and I were in Amsterdam with the Celluloid Closet, and Klaus delivered a letter to our hotel on United States Holocaust Memorial Museum letterhead asking for a meeting, and we met with him and were very impressed by what he had to tell us, which is that he said he had been doing these oral histories with gay male survivors of Nazi persecution, and that he had a handful that would be willing to tell their stories on camera. So that's how the project came to us.
I'm gonna turn to some of our audience questions now. For people who ask questions, some of these are kind of duplicates or repetitious. I'm just going to condense some of the questions where I can. I'll start, I guess, a very present tense question. There are a few different versions of this. It's, what you both are working on now, and just, I guess, is a question kind of about how the impact of the pandemic, perhaps your own experience just of it, how that how you could see that kind of affecting the work you're doing now or will make.
Well, what we're working on now, always the least favorite question, because talk is cheap, mm-hmm. and projects are ephemeral. But we're working on a film about the photographer Peter Hujar. We're developing a film on the photographer Peter Hujar. That's our main project right now.
And in terms of COVID, I have no idea.
Yeah.
Have to wait and see.
Yeah. This is a more concrete question. I guess for Rob, how did Harvey Fierstein come to be the narrator of Times of Harvey Milk?
Well, I knew I wanted to have a voice that had character, that the narrator wouldn't just feel like an omniscient character, but would feel like it had some subliminal kind of investment in the story. So I wanted it to feel like a gay perspective without any of that being literal. And Harvey was in Torch Song Trilogy at the time. So his show Torch Song Trilogy was getting attention, and he was getting notoriety, and we contacted him and got a message on an answering machine. I'll never forget that back when we had answering machines, Harvey Firestein. And he said he would do it. And at that point, I think the first recording with Harvey was in his, like a bedroom in his apartment in Brooklyn. That was like the scratch track for the narration.
Was he the only out gay actor at the time?
Probably was the only out gay actor at the time. Yeah, good point.
I have a question here about, I guess it's about aesthetics. Someone wants to know, when you're working on a documentary, do you find yourselves, I guess, searching out beautiful things, visually interesting things, or do you just kind of, I guess, not do that? Just kind of let the documentary kind of absorb things. I think maybe it's really just like a question about like, when you're, yeah, sorry.
No, I think it's an interesting question, a good one, because I think we do try and find some kind of anchoring visual metaphor that, with Harvey Milk, it was the candlelight march. With the quilt, obviously, it was the quilt. Paragraph 175, it was the train. And I think that came from a very early shoot on paragraph 175. We were supposed to do an interview. We had an interview set up with one of the survivors. And at the last minute, he said he wasn't going to do it. He couldn't do it. And that's actually the scene of Klaus in the phone booth in the film, where he's trying to convince Carl to let him at least come and visit. So we got on the train and filmed on the train, and then just that started to resonate. The idea of the train and the symbolism of the train became a motif.
And we're coming up on the end of our hour, sadly. So I wanted to kind of wrap this up, maybe by I just wanted to ask you guys sort of about the sort of role or notion of like the activist, artist. I mean, considering how kind of I think determinate like these films have been for a lot of people, kind of the way that they imagine a lot of the subjects. I was just wondering kind of when you guys, maybe at the outset of your partnership, what you kind of thought of the place of, the artist or documentarian or whatever, what they're kind of like, what the obligation would be to sort of like confront the political situation, maybe sort of how that's changed over time, because obviously so much has happened in this country politically over the past 30 years. So, yeah, have you noticed any kinds of shifts in the way that you guys think about that duty or obligation? Or
no, I mean, I don't think it's something that we think. I think we have activist impulses with our subject matter, but that's not the driving force or intention. I mean, there's an impulse behind it, but there isn't a specific agenda other than to give the audience, to hopefully create something that takes the audience somewhere in some visceral, experiential way. And I think that's the most politically effective presentation, is to just try and create an emotionally honest and truthful experience for the audience, however you do that. And we've often done that through oral histories, through, finding wonderful people that, it's kind of our job as filmmakers to take them back into their retelling of their own experiences and reliving their own experiences as oral histories, and then collectively formulating some kind of bigger picture presentation that hopefully means something.
Yeah, I guess I would just say that, you know, I grew up in a political family. You know, I sort of have this impulse to make things better. But, you know, and film is what I do. And, you know, I think everything we do is political, and you just want to, I want to make films about things that I care about, and I want them to resonate with people and to increase understanding. I think just understanding how the world works and who we are in the world, and you know, it's more, yeah, it's more of an instinct than a conscious mission, I think.
Yeah, I think that is it's a really lovely note to maybe conclude the discussion on. I thank you both very, very much for participating in all this, and for letting us show these completely amazing films that if the people at home haven't gotten to watch all of them yet, you should. You will not regret it. And yeah, the series will be going on until the 5th. So yeah, you'll have ample opportunity. But once again, Rob,
we just say a couple of final thank yous?
Yeah, by all means.
Well, first of all, to you, Dan, thank you for this conversation. And to Film at Lincoln Center for doing this retrospective. You know, having had films at the New York Film Festival showing at Lincoln Center, career highlights, life highlights, having had that experience twice. So thank you. And to the Film Society, and to Dennis and Amy, Dennis Doros and Amy Heller and their company Milestone for, you know, the work that they do, resurrecting films and restoring films and reissuing films like Shirley Clarke's Portrait of Jason and Charles Burnett's Killer of Sheep, and now a few of our titles. So we're very grateful for that.
Yeah.
We're good. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks again, guys. Thank you, Amy and Dennis. And yeah, yeah. Take care.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye.